Hello. Do let the readers and the listeners know who you are, what you do, and a brief background about your career.
Okay, I'm Nancy Kacungira. I am a presenter and reporter at BBC News. And at the moment, I present two programs, Focus on Africa and the World Business Report. So my background is an entrepreneur, actually. I started my own business about now almost seven years ago. But I left that to go full-time into journalism. And I began my career in Uganda before I moved to Kenya. And while I was in Kenya, I applied for the BBC Komla Dumor Award, which I was the first winner of in 2015. And I went on to join the BBC as a reporter, and now I am a presenter there.
From Uganda to Kenya to London.
Yes.
How has the experience been from moving from Africa to the UK? Experience in terms of your profession, your career?
I think it's interesting because you get obviously a bigger stage, a bigger platform, but I think the core remains the same. And what gives you the edge or the expertise is actually where you come from. So I think that's really important in terms of, we often think that when we get to certain places we need to change, but I find the beautiful thing is actually in remaining the same. So it is because I come from a small town, I was born in a small town in Tanzania, that my perspective is different from people who've come from other places. And because I've seen what life is like in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Kenya, I've lived there, I've started a business there, I've gone to school there, my perspective is very local, but at the same time very global because of the exposure that I've been able to have. So I find that where I come from is very important in terms of who I am as a journalist and what I do.
Just an off-hand question. People watch you on BBC World TV and Focus on Africa, and I'm sure some people will be thinking, how difficult or how easy is it for an African to be telling an African story on the non-African platform? Are you pressured? Do you have pressures, or is it easy for you?
I think the fact that I am at the BBC is a sign that they believe that Africans should be the ones telling African stories. That's a big thing that the Komla Dumor Award was set up to achieve. And the truth is that our perspective, is always going to be, I think, different in the sense of where we're coming from. But having said that, an African won't tell a better story just because they're African,
Come again, an African won't tell
a better African story just because they're African.
Why so?
Because it's about more than just being from somewhere, It is about understanding the nuances, it is about understanding the context, it's about being able to analyze it. So there are a lot of African journalists, for instance, who may just be mimicking what Western journalists write. That doesn't mean they're better because they're African. So I think what makes the difference, whatever kind of journalist you are, is trying to understand, especially in this world that's full of fake news, that's full of misinformation, is trying to understand what the context is, what the analysis is being sensitive to different parts of the world and representing the people from those parts of the world. And I don't think that is something that uniquely African. What is different is that we as Africans have to champion the narrative of ourselves that we want to see. And that's why you find that, it's important to have African journalists representing that.
From the way you talk, it's obvious you have a passion for this. What drives you? What has been motivating you from Uganda, Kenya, and to the BBC?
When I started my business, I started to hire young people because it was a digital business and you needed young people. And I realized that one of the things that seemed to be lacking is just a certain amount of confidence, you know, in believing that we can do things, in believing that we can invent and innovate and create. And part of that comes from representation. If you've never seen someone like you achieve something, it's very difficult to imagine yourself doing that. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of imagery and the power of representation. When a child grows up and never sees anyone who looks like them being the first to go somewhere, being the first to invent something, you know, being esteemed as a creator, as an innovator, it's very difficult for them to imagine doing the same. And so my passion is I want to broaden the representation of Africa. We shouldn't just be the poster child for famine, for hunger, for poverty, for disease. You know, there's so much else. And the more we see of those images, it's important for us, you know, as people, as a continent, if we're going to progress, we must have more of those images to reinforce younger generations. And so that's where my passion comes from, is I want the next generations who hire people, they'll find young people confident in themselves, who know who they are, and who are determined and motivated to change the continent.
Few short questions to follow. What's your most interesting project ever? Most interesting, it could be intriguing, it could be difficult, but what's your most interesting?
I think that my favorite one is because it really struck a chord, is probably the one about the American woman who moved to Ghana.
Okay.
Yeah. She lived all her life in the United States. She was African American, and at the age of 50, she moved to Ghana. And it's one of my favorite stories because at that time, the entire world was talking about the problem of migration, and it looked like the whole of Africa was moving. And yet, there were many other people who were going the other way, saying, you know, we want to rediscover our roots. We want to go back to a place that is peaceful, that is, you know. And so I like that it was changing the narrative and broadening it.
Interesting. Two questions to go. As a young African, what do you think? Do you think the media space is encouraging enough for African ladies to blossom?
No, I don't think it's encouraging enough.
Nice.
I think
Good to know you're honest.
Yeah, I think a lot more needs to be done. But at the same time, we can't wait for people to give us opportunities. We have to take them. We have to step out. We have to create things for ourselves. And I see many young women doing that, and that's what will make the difference. Is us stepping up and taking.
Okay. Final question. What's the title of the book you're currently reading?
I read more than one book at a time, but at the moment I'm reading Prisoners of Geography.
By?
I'll remember the name. I can't remember the name right now, but if you Google the title, you'll find it.
Obviously.
But it's a great book about geopolitics.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.